spring of 2011, a man sent one short message to a colleague, closed his laptop, and was never heard from again.
He left behind a working system of money that no bank issued, no government printed, and no single person could switch off. Everything he wrote was signed with a single name, Satoshi Nakamoto. That name has never been matched to a verified human being. Not whether he was one person or several, not what country he sat in, not whether he is still alive today. Tonight we tell this story the way it is usually told. Then, at the end, we separate the parts that are documented from the parts that are only legend. Because the strangest question about this man is not who he was. It is why vanishing may have been the most deliberate thing he ever did. To understand that, we go back 3 years to the night the world's money system stopped trusting itself. Autumn 2008. Banks that had lent to each other overnight for more than a century simply stopped. Not because the paperwork was wrong, because nobody could tell anymore whose ledger was telling the truth. Every dollar you have ever owned exists as a line in somebody else's book, not as an object, as a record kept for you by them. Then, in the first week of 2009, a small file appeared online. Buried in its very first entry was a line lifted from that morning's newspaper about a second rescue for the banks. It was a timestamp, proving the thing could not have been made earlier. It was also a verdict. Whoever built this wanted the record to show exactly what he had built it against. That autumn, on an ordinary street in an ordinary town, a family repair shop sat directly across from a bank branch. The father had fixed other people's machines for 26 years. He trusted things he could open with a screwdriver. His daughter ran the counter, the website, and every argument in the shop about how the world was going to work next. Across the street that week, the queue outside the bank branch stopped being the usual lunchtime queue. In the back office of that branch, an older clerk still kept a written ledger beside the terminal, out of a habit nobody had asked him to break. For 3 days that week, he watched instructions arrive that no one on either side was willing to confirm. A bank does not keep your money in a drawer. It keeps a promise and lends the rest onward, which works perfectly until everyone asks at once. Behind every payment you have ever made sits a chain of record keepers, your bank, their bank, a clearinghouse, and a central bank at the end of it. That chain never held because of steel. It held because every link believed the next one would honor the record. Governments stepped in with the largest rescue packages in living memory. The system was saved. The belief underneath it was not. In the repair shop, all of it arrived the way it arrived for most people. Secondhand, on a wall of other people's screens. The daughter asked her father a question he had never once had to think about. What actually makes the money in their account real? The honest answer is uncomfortable. It is real because an institution says it is, and because almost everyone agrees to keep believing that answer. Out of that autumn came a conclusion that had nothing to do with blaming bankers. Some engineers decided the flaw was not in the people. It was in the shape of the thing. Any ledger with a keeper can be edited by whoever keeps it. That is not corruption. That is the definition of a keeper. If you have followed this series from the beginning, you already know that question. It is the only question we have ever really been asking. Who keeps the book? A family dynasty's private ledger, a secret meeting on a private island, a trading floor that fell silent for a decade, a veto, a printing press, and a closed gold window. Every one of those stories ended the same way. The keeper changed. There was always, still, a keeper. In the winter of 2008, for the first time in 2 centuries of this story, somebody proposed a different answer. Not a better keeper, not a more honest one, no keeper at all. To anyone who understood how money actually worked, the idea sounded less like innovation and more like nonsense, because a record with no keeper has one obvious hole in it. What stops me from spending the same coin twice? That single hole had defeated every attempt for 20 years. Brilliant people had tried. All of them ended up appointing a keeper again. Then, on the 31st of October, 2008, a 9-page document was emailed to a small mailing list of cryptography enthusiasts. Fewer than a few hundred people received it. Most never opened it. A handful skimmed it and moved on with their evening. One of them read it twice, sat back, and typed a reply that would put his name in the story permanently. The document was 9 pages long. No manifesto, no promises of wealth, just plumbing, written by somebody who clearly expected to be argued with. Its title was almost aggressively boring: a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Not a revolution, a filing method. The list it landed on was small and specific. Cryptographers, privacy advocates, and engineers who had been arguing about digital money since before most people had email. They had seen versions of this promise many times, and they had watched every one of them fail in the same place. The first serious attempt came in the 1980s from an American cryptographer named David Chaum, who understood earlier than almost anyone what electronic payment would cost people in privacy. His system let you pay someone without the bank learning what you bought. Mathematically, it worked. Commercially, it needed a company to run it. By the end of the 1990s, that company was gone. The mathematics survived. The keeper did not, and when the keeper went, so did the money. In 1997, a British researcher named Adam Back proposed something else. Make every email pay a tiny cost in computing effort so that flooding millions of inboxes became expensive. That idea was called proof of work. Its point was simple. Effort is hard to fake and easy for anyone else to check. A year later, an engineer writing as Wei Dai sketched a system where every participant kept their own copy of every transaction. He called it B-Money. It was close. It also had no way to settle a disagreement. If 2 copies of the ledger disagreed, nothing in the design could say which one was right. Around the same years, an American computer scientist and legal scholar named Nick Szabo designed something he called BitGold, chaining proofs of work one after another, each built on the last. And he hit the same wall as everyone else. Who decides the order? Who says which link came first? Physical cash never had this problem because physics solved it. When a note leaves your hand, it is gone from your hand. Nobody has to be told. A digital file is the opposite. It copies perfectly, endlessly at no cost. That is exactly what makes it useful for photographs and useless for money. So every previous system solved it the only way anyone knew how. It put somebody in charge of deciding what had really happened. A keeper. Again. The 9 pages that arrived on the last day of October 2008 did not appoint anybody. That was the entire point, and that was why the list argued about it for weeks. The veteran coder, Hal Finney, wrote that the idea looked promising and that he wanted to try running it. Others pushed back hard. It would never scale. It would be crushed by governments. It would be swamped by anyone with enough machines. The author answered every objection. Politely, precisely, and always about the design. Never once about himself. People noticed small things. British spellings in some messages, American phrasing in others. A writing style that read like someone older than the average hobbyist. Years later, researchers mapped the timestamps on his messages, looking for the hours he never seemed to be awake. The pattern they found has been argued about ever since. In January of 2009, he released the software itself. Anyone could download it. Anyone could read every line of it. The first entry in the chain was created on the 3rd of January. Inside it, he placed that newspaper line about a second rescue for the banks. There was no technical need for that line. He put it there because a foundation stone is also where you write why you built. 9 days after that, the first transfer in the system's history moved 10 coins from the author to the veteran coder who had answered him. Nothing happened. No headlines, no markets, no price. 2 people had proved a piece of software worked, and the world did not notice for a year. That same winter, the repair shop was busier than it had been in years. In a bad economy, people stop replacing things and start fixing them. Across the street, the branch stayed open, the queue went back to normal, and the older clerk went on writing his lines by hand. The daughter found the software the way most early users did. Through a forum argument she was only half following. She set an old machine running in the back room overnight. It made a noise like a hairdryer and produced nothing anybody wanted. Her father's verdict took 4 seconds. Money is what other people will take from you. Nobody will take that. For most of 2009, he was right. The coins had no price because nobody had ever traded one for anything at all. The first exchange rate anyone quoted came from a hobbyist who calculated what the electricity cost to make them. By that method, $1 bought more than 1,000 coins, which means this thing had a price before it had a use. That order of events would define almost everything that came after it. Through all of it, the author wrote publicly almost every day. Thousands of posts about the software, and almost nothing about the person writing them. No photograph, no video, no interview. Not one recorded second of his voice exists anywhere. When people asked about him, he steered the conversation back to the code and asked them to judge the work rather than the author. In those first months, he also ran the software himself, and the coins produced in that early period were never spent. Not then, not since. Whatever else is true about this man, that detail is hard to explain away. He built something, kept a share of it, and then never touched it again. By the end of that year, a small circle of volunteers had formed around the project. They wrote documentation, fixed bugs, and ran the network on their own machines for nothing. Nobody was employed. Nobody was in charge. The project's entire management structure was people arguing in public until somebody gave way. Outside that circle, 2009 was a year of unemployment queues, repossessed houses, and long official reports about what had gone wrong. 2 very different answers to the same autumn were being written at once. One in government buildings, in public. One on a mailing list, by somebody with no name. And then, in the spring of 2010, somebody finally used the thing to buy something you could actually eat. On the 22nd of May, 2010, a programmer in Florida named Laszlo Hanyecz offered 10,000 coins to anyone who would order him 2 pizzas. Somebody took him up on it, placed the order with a credit card, and the coins moved across the network in a few minutes. That was the first time anyone had traded this thing for a physical object. 2 pizzas gave it something no calculation ever had. A price agreed by 2 people who both walked away satisfied. That meal is now the most discussed dinner in the history of money, and the man who ate it has said repeatedly that he has no regrets about it. But the interesting part of that evening was not the pizza. It was that a payment crossed the world with nobody in the middle deciding whether to allow it. Which raises the question this whole story turns on. If nobody is keeping the record, then how does anyone know it is true? The answer starts with a decision that sounds wasteful. Instead of one ledger held safely in one place, every participant holds a complete copy of the entire history. When you pay someone, you do not send the payment to them. You announce it to the whole network at once, and everybody writes it down. The difficult part was never the writing down. It was agreeing on the order. Which payment came first, when thousands arrive at once from everywhere? So the design bundles recent payments into batches. Roughly every 10 minutes, one batch is sealed shut, and that batch becomes the official next page. Which raises the same old question in a new suit. Who gets to decide which batch is the official one? The answer was the one piece nobody before had put in the right place. Not a vote, which can be faked with fake identities. A race, which costs real electricity to enter. Machines all over the world guess numbers, billions of times a second. hunting for one that fits the batch they are holding. There is no clever shortcut. There is only trying. When one machine finds it, everyone else can confirm the answer instantly. Hard to produce, trivial to verify. That asymmetry is the whole trick. The winner is paid in newly created coins. That reward is the reason anyone bothers, and it is also the only way new coins have ever entered existence. Each sealed batch also carries a fingerprint of the batch before it. Change anything in an old page, and every page after it stops matching. So rewriting history is not a matter of persuading a clerk. You would have to redo every race since that page, faster than everybody else in the world put together. The system does not ask anyone to be honest. It arranges the arithmetic so that cheating costs more than playing along. That is the actual invention. Look at what that does to the oldest job in this series. The record keeper is not removed. He is copied thousands of times over until no single copy matters. The design also fixed the supply. 21 million coins, ever, with the reward for winning cut in half roughly every 4 years until it reaches nothing. Nobody can vote to print more. Not a committee, not a government, not the people who wrote the code. Scarcity by schedule rather than by promise. One thing surprises people. This is not secret money. Every payment ever made sits in public view, permanently, for anybody to examine. What is hidden is the name attached. Accounts are long strings of characters rather than people, which is not anonymity. It is a mask, and masks can slip. There is a cost to all of this, and it is not hidden either. The security is made of electricity, and critics have argued for years that it is an enormous amount of it. Supporters answer that the cost is the point, because a wall that is cheap to build is cheap to knock down. Both sides of that argument have been made in good faith for over a decade. And there is a harder cost. With no keeper, there is no complaints department. Send it to the wrong place or lose your key, and there is nobody who can undo it for you. Which is the honest shape of the whole thing. The freedom from a keeper and the absence of a rescuer are the same feature, described twice. Through 2010, the network grew from a hobby into something with exchanges, prices, and its first genuine speculators. Then, in August of that year, somebody found a flaw in the code and created a quantity of coins out of nothing that should have been impossible. Within hours, the volunteers had found it, written a fix, and asked everyone running the software to switch to a corrected version of the history, which is the part that rarely makes it into the legend. A system with no one in charge was rescued that day by a handful of people agreeing quickly in public with each other. No one controlled the network. But people still decided things about it, and that gap between those two sentences is where most arguments about this money still live. It also attracted the users any cash-like system attracts. By 2011, an illegal marketplace was running on it, and it took the authorities 2 years to shut that marketplace down. Which is not unique to digital money. It is what happens to every payment method that works without asking permission first, including the banknotes in your wallet. In the repair shop, the daughter had stopped calling it an experiment and started calling it a hobby, which is how most durable things begin. Her father still did not believe in it, but he had started asking questions about it, which in his vocabulary was the same as respect. Across the street, the branch carried on exactly as before, which is the thing people forget about revolutions in money. They arrive slowly and mostly in other people's rooms, which leaves the question the father kept asking, and it deserves a straight answer. Why would a string of characters be worth anything at all? The honest answer is the one this series reached in every previous episode. A shell, a coin, a note, or a line of code is worth something when enough people behave as if it is. What changed in 2009 was not what money is made of. It was where the trust was placed, not in an institution, but in a process anybody could inspect. Whether that is an improvement is not a question this episode can settle, and anyone who tells you it is settled is selling you something. But by the end of 2010, something in the story changed, and it had nothing to do with the software. The author, who had posted almost daily for 2 years, began writing less, shorter answers, longer silences between them. Something had changed his mind about being anywhere near this thing, and the reason is documented in his own words, in public. In December of 2010, an organization that published leaked government documents was cut off by every major payment company at once and announced it would accept donations in this new digital money instead. Most of the community celebrated. The author did not. He wrote that the project needed to grow gradually and that this attention had arrived far too early. His exact words are still online. He said the hornet's nest had been kicked and the swarm was heading their way. On the 12th of December, 2010, he made his last public post on the forum. It was about a routine software update. Over the following months, he quietly transferred control of the project to a volunteer developer named Gavin Anderson, including the emergency alert key that could warn the whole network at once. Then, in April of 2011, he sent that developer a short message saying he had moved on to other things and that the project was in good hands. That was the end of it. No farewell, no explanation, no last statement of principles. A man who had written thousands of public messages simply stopped mid-conversation. Within months, the thing he had walked away from was in newspapers all over the world, and the first question every reporter asked was the one he had spent 2 years refusing to answer. So began the strangest manhunt in the history of finance, not for a criminal and not for a fugitive, for an author who had committed no crime and taken nothing from anyone. Linguists ran his writing through comparison software, matching phrasing and punctuation against the published work of every plausible candidate. Others mapped every timestamp he had ever left, looking for the hours he was always asleep, and argued for years about which part of the world that pointed to. The first name was the obvious one. Hal Finney, the veteran coder who received the very first transfer and who had spent his career building the tools this system depended on. He denied it consistently for the rest of his life. He was already ill by then with a disease that would take him in 2014, and he stayed publicly involved until he could no longer type. The second name was the man who had designed the closest earlier system, Nick Szabo. Several linguistic studies pointed at his writing more strongly than at anyone else's. He has denied it plainly and repeatedly for more than a decade. No document, no key, and no transaction has ever tied him to it. In March of 2014, an American magazine ran a cover story announcing that it had found him, living quietly in a Los Angeles suburb. The man they named was a retired engineer in his 60s who had never worked on this software in his life. Within a day, camera crews were parked outside his house. He denied it that day and has denied it ever since. He said afterwards that the weeks that followed were the most stressful of his life. And then something happened that had not happened in 3 years. The author's old account, silent since 2011, posted 5 words, "I am not Dorian Nakamoto." Whether that was really him or someone with access to an old account has never been established. Nothing has been posted from it since. Meanwhile, thousands of strangers raised a fund for the man whose life had been disrupted by a mistaken cover story. It remains one of the more decent moments in this story. In 2016, an Australian computer scientist named Craig Wright publicly claimed to be him and promised proof that would satisfy everyone. The proof he offered convinced almost no one, and he never produced the one thing that would settle it. In 2024, a British court examined the claim in detail and ruled that he is not the author. Because there is a simple test. The earliest coins have never moved. Whoever holds those keys could sign a single message and end the mystery in an afternoon. In 18 years, nobody has. And here is where this story stops being a mystery about a person and becomes something else entirely. The question worth asking was never who he was. It is why a man who had just built the most talked about thing in modern finance decided that his last contribution should be to remove himself from it. He had spent 2 years removing every single point of failure from the design. No company, no server, no committee, no vault. By 2011, exactly one was left. Himself. A founder can be argued with, appealed to, pressured, subpoenaed, arrested, or simply believed too much. He also had recent examples in front of him. 2 earlier private currency ventures in the United States had ended in federal prosecutions within the previous 4 years. And there is a subtler danger than prison. As long as he was there, every hard argument would eventually be settled by asking him. And a system where somebody can settle arguments has a keeper again. Gold has no inventor to interview. Nobody asks what the founder of Gold thinks about the price this week because there is no such person to ask. So the disappearance was not an escape from the project. On this reading, it was the last component of it. He did not only design a money with no keeper, he made certain that he could not become one. It is worth saying plainly that this is an interpretation, not a confession. He never explained his reasons, and people who leave rarely have only one. His absence also had a price. Every argument the community had after that about size, speed, and direction had to be settled without the one person everyone would have deferred to. Some of those arguments got so bitter that groups walked away and started their own competing versions, which is a story large enough for its own episode. In the repair shop, 2011 brought a different kind of customer. People walking in to ask whether the daughter could build them a machine to run the software. Her father still would not touch it. His question by then had shifted from whether it worked to who would answer if it went wrong. It was a fair question, and within 3 years, he would be proved uncomfortably right, though not for the reason he expected. Across the street, the older clerk had finally been told the handwritten ledger was no longer required and had kept writing in it anyway. One record kept by hand in a branch office, thousands of identical copies of another kept on machines in bedrooms all over the world, both claiming to be the truth about who owns what. Through those years, the price of a coin rose, collapsed, rose again, and collapsed again, in cycles violent enough that people lost real savings in both directions. That is not a detail to skip past. Anything that can rise like that can fall the same distance, and plenty of people have found that out the hard way. And there was a second, quieter problem. Most people did not want to guard their own keys, so they left their coins with companies that would hold them on their behalf. Which means that within 3 years of its launch, the money with no keeper was mostly being held, in practice, by keepers. The largest of those companies was an exchange in Tokyo that had started life-trading collectible game cards. By 2013, it handled most of the world's trades in this money. In February of 2014, that exchange stopped letting anyone withdraw. Then it went quiet. Then it filed for bankruptcy. Roughly 850,000 coins belonging to customers were gone. Some were later recovered. Most of the story took another decade to work through the courts. Here is the part that matters for this story. The network itself did not fail that week. It kept producing a sealed page every 10 minutes, exactly as designed, throughout the entire collapse. What failed was a company holding other people's money. In other words, the oldest failure in this entire series, wearing new clothes. The lesson the community drew from it became a phrase repeated ever since. If somebody else holds the keys, the thing you own is not the coins. It is their promise, which, if you have been listening carefully for the past 5 episodes, is the exact description of a bank deposit as well. In the repair shop that winter, 2 customers came in asking whether anything could be recovered from an old machine they had wiped years earlier. Sometimes there was something on the drive, usually there was not. There is no appeal process for a forgotten key, and there never will be. Her father, who had been right about the risk for 6 years, did not say a word about it. He just made them both tea and looked at the drive with her. That same year, the branch across the street closed for good, consolidated into a bigger one 2 towns over, along with several thousand others across the country that decade. The older clerk carried out 1 box on the last afternoon, and the ledger was in it. So what had actually been built? The people who believe in it will tell you it is the first money in history whose supply no government can expand, available to anyone with a connection and no permission required. They point to people in countries where the local currency has lost most of its value in a decade, and where a bank account is not a thing everyone is allowed to have. The people who do not believe in it will tell you it is far too unstable to function as money, that it is used more for speculation than for paying anybody, and that its running costs are enormous. They also point out that a system built to have no center now runs through a small number of very large exchanges and mining operations, which is not what was drawn on those 9 pages. Both of those descriptions are accurate. They are not 2 opinions about one thing. They are 2 true halves of the same unfinished experiment. Every form of money in this series took decades to become normal, and most of them broke at least once on the way. This one is younger than a teenager, which brings us back to the desk where this series has been sitting for 6 episodes, and to the only question any of it has ever really been about. Season 1 began with a banking family whose private ledger and whose faster messengers let them see the shape of a battle before their own government did. Then a handful of men on a private island writing the plan for a central bank in secret because they knew it would never survive being written in public. Then a trading floor that fell silent for a decade, and a rebuilt system of protections that came out of it. Then 2 centuries of governments and bankers fighting over who issues the money, and a Sunday night when the last link to gold was quietly closed. 5 episodes, 2 centuries, and underneath every one of them, the same question: who keeps the book, and what stops them changing it? This chapter is the first time in the whole series that the answer came back different. Not a better keeper. Everybody or nobody, depending on which day you ask. And the man who made that possible paid for it in the only currency he seemed to care about. He gave up ever being known for it. The repair shop is still there. The daughter runs the bench now, and her father comes in 3 days a week, mostly to disagree with her about how things should be fixed. The old machine that hummed in the back room is on a shelf above the bench now, unplugged. She kept it for the same reason people keep first coins. Across the street, where the branch used to be, there is a coffee shop, and nobody who works in it knows what the building used to hold. Which brings us to the part of this series where we go back over the story and separate what is documented from what has simply been repeated often enough to feel true. 7 of them tonight. Myth 1. His identity is known and has simply been covered up. No verified identity exists. Several people have been named by journalists and researchers, and every one of them has denied it. One man who claimed the name for years was found by a British court in 2024 not to be him. Myth 2. He was a lone genius who invented all of this from nothing. Almost every component already existed. The proof of work, the chained timestamps, the shared ledger, the digital signatures. His contribution was the arrangement, and the arrangement is what 20 years of clever people had missed. Myth 3. He disappeared in order to spend a hidden fortune quietly. The coins associated with the earliest period have never moved. Not during any peak, not during any collapse, not once in more than 15 years. That is the single hardest fact in this entire story to explain away. Myth 4. The newspaper line in the first entry proves the whole thing was created as a response to the bank rescues of 2008. The line is real, verifiable, and clearly deliberate. But the work predates the crisis. The design drew on ideas from the 1990s And the project's website was registered months before that headline was printed. It is a timestamp with an opinion attached, not a birth certificate. Myth 5. This money is completely anonymous, which is why it is used for crime. It is the opposite of anonymous. Every payment ever made is public and permanent, which is why analysis firms and investigators trace them routinely, and why several very large criminal cases were solved using that public record. Myth 6. A government intelligence agency built it, and the pseudonym is their cover story. No evidence has ever supported it. The code, the discussions, the mistakes, and the arguments were all conducted in the open, where anybody can still read them, which is an unusual way to run a secret operation. Myth 7. He is definitely dead, and that is why the coins have never moved. Nobody knows. It is a reasonable theory, and there is no evidence for it. He may have died. He may have decided the story was better without him in it. Both are guesses, and this series will not pretend otherwise. In every era this series has visited, somebody sat slightly to one side of history and wrote down what happened while everyone else argued about it. He was never in charge of any of it. He simply kept the record, which for most of this series was quietly the most powerful job in the room. Every page behind this one belongs to a room you have already seen, a private study, an island clubhouse, a trading floor, a closed gold window. And tonight, for the first time in 2 centuries of this record, the line he writes is one that thousands of strangers are writing at exactly the same moment. They will never meet him. They do not know his name, and not one of them needs his permission, which is either the end of his profession or the largest promotion it has ever been given. Season 1 ends without deciding which leaves one question this chapter cannot settle for you. Whoever he was disappearing the right call, or did he simply leave a mess for everybody else to sort out? The comments are where we read your answer to that one. If you want the rest of this record, subscribing is how the next chapter reaches you. And on Wednesday, this channel opens a different book altogether and reads back every line season 1 put into it. This series is made for education and for entertainment. Nothing in it is advice about what anyone should buy or hold, and tonight in particular was a story about trust, not about a price. And next Sunday, Season 2 begins where this one ended, with the question nobody in 6 episodes has answered. What happens to a country when the money itself stops working?